Okay, today, well, for now, we're doing inner child work. Um, it's an area that has been explored for at least 30, 40 years. And I'm just going to share with you how I think about it, because there's a lot of literature on this area. Inner child work, in the simplest way that I think about it, is connecting with different memories of being a child or an adolescent and trying to connect with that part and bring the adult of today to be present with the memory. It's a little bit like traveling back in time and giving myself back then what I didn't have. In a way, it's a little bit like reparenting myself. So for me, the two most important concepts that I always keep in my head is the following. The first one is to be grounded as an adult, meaning to get a sense of myself as an adult today. And to be grounded means to feel quite anchored in it, both emotionally, intellectually, physically, and other aspects of myself. For example, right now, I'm conscious of the contact between my feet and the slippers I'm wearing. That's grounding. I'm reminding myself to stay in adult form, because that's the trickiest thing. The trickiest thing with connecting with childhood memories is that some memories have such emotional charge that they can pull me back from being an adult today. And I ended up being in the memory of a child without the adult of today, and that kind of defeats the purpose, because what could happen then is I get overwhelmed all over again and perhaps get in a dissociative state. By the way, this area of inner child work, there are crossovers with other areas which I'll discuss in other videos. For example, parts work, different parts internally, like the critical voice, a voice from society, or a voice of a teacher, or another area which is dissociation, which I'm also hoping to cover. So there are crossovers between these three, and there are repetitions, like I said, and I'm not trying to make sure that there are no repetitions. In fact, I'm doing the opposite. There are the important concepts I will try to repeat again and again, because it's not just about trying to know something intellectually in a mathematical way. Like, an insight is not enough to be able to apply the work. So insights are good, but they need to be anchored again and again, especially if they sound very simple, because there's a tendency from my head is like, yeah, I know that. But it's actually the practice that really matters. Doing something again and again. One of the things that I keep on stressing is that I aim to be present to myself and compassionate to myself. That sounds very simple, but the application is actually very tricky. So, back to what I was trying to say, which is make sure I'm grounded and check in with myself first. For example, if I'm very stressed, then one way of looking at it is that I'm not very resourced. I don't feel well enough to be doing some of this work. If I'm stressed, I check in, can I do some of this, or does it look like it's gonna get messy and foggy and dissociate? So that's one of the things, again, to practice again, practice checking in with oneself. And it's not a science. I don't have, it's not like you can check your blood sugars through, an instrument, and then you get a number. It's like, oh, the number is below certain, and I won't do the work today, or oh, I'm okay actually. So checking in is a very subjective thing. Sometimes I might feel okay, and then I ended up doing something and I get very overwhelmed. So the nature of this work is trial and error. But that's the first concept for me, which is very important, is get a sense of being an adult, make sure I'm grounded, and then give it a go. The second thing is, there is having the intention to do this work, as in, every day I'm going to do this for 5 minutes, for example. Just take an age which I know, for example, while I was very stressed, an age, say, between 7. And in my case, I had come to Lebanon. I've been here for a couple of years. I used to speak Portuguese. That was my first language. My dad wasn't living with us, and not my mom either. It was just our grandmother and my brother. And so I know in general it's an area that sometimes it needs work, but the question is, am I ready to do the work or not? So I could intentionally set myself to do this work, or memories emerge on their own. So I'll try to give you some examples. So about 12 years ago, my situation in Ireland with the court cases and all of that got so tough that I decided to move to spend some time in Barcelona. And one of the things that I wanted to do is learn to read music better. By then I was playing music for, I don't know, maybe 30 years or so, and there were times when I would try to read. I'm mainly into blues guitar, so I never thought it was necessary. But it's a skill that I would have liked to have developed. So I decided, okay, I'm going to give it a go. And I love Bach, the cello suites. And there was a piece of music that I decided, okay, I'm going to try to learn to play this piece as a way of teaching myself to read. So at that stage I could read very slowly. It's like when I was a kid, the boy went to school. I was at that kind of level. And I would try to learn. And I started, as I'm trying to do this, I started to remember the age of 5, when my dad had taken us from my mom in Brazil. We came to Lebanon, and then we went to Syria, and they put me in a class 2 years above my level in my brother's class, had I spoken the language. So I didn't even have good Arabic, and I was in a class that was way above my level. And I remember that during recess time, the teacher used to keep me back to help me catch up. My memory was that those teachers I don't remember them being nasty or particularly harsh, but I remember the feeling of being overwhelmed, that this is too much for me. And so as I was trying to learn to read music at the age of, 45 or something like that, I was getting memories of being 5. And I would notice that every time I made a mistake, I felt uncomfortable. I felt a kind of a mild sense of panic. And that's when I decided to stop and reflect, because I knew then as a psychologist that if you're trying to learn something, and fear comes up, then it's going to slow the process. By then I had learned through practical experience that the best way to learn is in a relaxed state. Now that sounds perhaps obvious, but like most people, I was in a state of, well, just let's push through, because most of my experiences with education is to push through. So anyway, I decided to stop and rethink my approach. And what I realized is that if I keep on going with the way I was going, which is trying to learn, is that a B flat or is that an A flat? If I'm trying to figure it out intellectually, learn how to read, is that an ambulance, an ambulance, if I'm trying to figure it out intellectually and there is fear, it's going to hinder the process of developing a skill of being able to read in a flow. And I realize if I keep on going that way, I'm just going to be learning to read while being afraid. So this is where I stopped, and I thought, okay, what's more important than the task here, and the task was to learn music, what's more important is that I need to reassess how I'm learning. And I realized I need to learn how to learn in a relaxed way. So that was a breakthrough, because I could have just kept on pushing through in a method would probably get me there, but it's not a very good method, basically. The great thing about the insight is that I caught myself and reassessed the whole thing and decided that learning to read music needs to wait. And when I reflected on it, I decided, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Every time I'm trying to learn to read something and I'm go back to that memory, or the memory comes up on its own, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop and I'm going to soothe myself. So the exercise changed from learning to read to soothing, which is relearning. So this is what I started to do then. From there I was like, okay, it doesn't matter how long it will take for me to learn how to read. Because that could have been something that I've pushed on myself and ended up being frustrated, So that's what I did. From then on, and since then, every time I'm trying to learn a new task, I would comfort myself first. Eventually, it took a long time. I became a better reader and I learned to play that piece. So that's an example of inner child work where I hadn't set out the intention to do inner child work. It emerged on its own. I had the insights already that inner child work is about comforting yourself, and I put these into application. There are other times, like I said, when I would be aware that there are areas in my life that need some loving, need me to go back to and try to embrace and all of that. There is an example, I'm not sure if you describe it as child work, but maybe I'll put it in somewhere else. Maybe that's parts work. You know what? I'll share it twice. It's okay. It's not a big deal if you hear it twice, because it's quite significant. So this might not technically fall under inner child work, but it's the same concept. I remember maybe 15 years ago, I was talking to a friend and telling him that at the age of 5 around the same period, actually, when I was in Syria. It was the first time that I contemplated suicide, the first time I contemplated jumping from the balcony. And I remember when talking to this friend, and we were very close at the time, I remembered that I have told this story to other people, but on this occasion, after we hung up the phone, I felt that the whole thing became more alive. So there are some people that I talk to, I might describe something, and it stays on an intellectual level. It stays on a level of, well, I know I need to work on this. But on this occasion, it became more alive. And afterwards, I decided, okay, I need to work on this area. And I decided that every morning, I'm going to sit at the edge of the bed, and I'm going to connect with being 5. And I remember in the time that the insight I got was that there is a part of me, not everything intellectually, a part that still felt we should have left the world instead of having to stay and do all this painful psychological and therapeutic work and all in order to get to a better place. It's a lot of work, So intellectually, I wasn't thinking that way overall. I was convinced and committed to staying here for the sake of others around me. But there was still a part, that's parts work, there was still a part that felt different than the way I was thinking about life. And I decided every morning I'm going to sit at the edge of the bed, I'm going to feel my feet grounded, and I'm going to think not of myself at 5, I'm going to think of that part that wants to leave, and try to evoke a sense of embracing that part. It's like I had an image of myself in the distance, and that image looked like me and felt that way, and that part, I'm not going to act on its wish, I'm going to just simply embrace how it is, which is it still wants to leave. So I did that for about a month or 2 months, and then that feeling went away. That it felt like that part got soothed and no longer had that feeling. However, with time, it did come back. Those feelings did come back. So the point here is that to soothe different parts, whether it's a child or part, to soothe, and I might feel soothed for a while, and then it's up to me to decide, do I continue or not, or leave it because there's so much work anyway, but not to be disappointed if those feelings come back. That's the nature of trauma. So there are crossovers. Inner child work and parts work are similar. I will discuss some issues different when it comes to parts work, but in general, I think of it in a very simple way. I just think about it as, well, what parts of my history need comforting, and when is it appropriate to try to do some of that work? And if I decided to do it consciously with intention, to check in with myself, and sometimes they emerge on their own anyway. But one of the things, for example, it can happen all of this work can be focused with an intention, or they happen spontaneously, but it doesn't have to be very structured either. It doesn't have to be sitting and grounded. It could be some of the light issues. For example, one of the things that are excuse me, one of the things that are, closest to my heart is playing music, and my commitment to music goes quite deep, and I remember, I don't know when this happened, but I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, which is a passing thought, which is the realization that I'm constantly trying to improve my skills and reach a better level, and then I noticed this is endless, the nature of music. I mean, I remember actually talking to a jazz saxophonist called Joe Henderson, legendary sax player. I don't know, when was that? 25 years ago, Village Vanguard, New York, and during the break I talked to him and he said he still practices. And I was like, whoa, and I realized there is no end to the life of a musician who's trying to improve. And this is where I noticed that I could end up being caught up that intellectually that I'm not good enough, because I still need to keep on working on it. So that's the paradox of it. How to stay committed and how to serve the craft, how to keep on learning, but instead of it coming from a place of insecurity that I'm not good enough, how about I try an approach of, this is great where I am today, or is it? And then I ask myself, what would the 14-year-old in me think of my playing today? Because trying to convince myself that I'm good enough might not, might on some intellectual level feel right or not, or whatever. So that's the thinking of the adult. So I switched it, and for a second I asked myself, okay, get out of the adult mode and ask myself, what would the 14-year-old think of my level today? And it was a very spontaneous answer, which like, wow, it's amazing, I wish I could play like you. So what's important about this is tapping into a different zone. It's about getting out of intellect that by nature judges and has been through the school system of grading and all of that fucked up shit, and nobody, and I thank God I didn't go through any music school, because I don't think that would have been good for me, especially for the type of music that I'm trying to play, especially for writing my own music. I'm not trying to play by others' standards and breaking into a field, so that was a moment where I got out of adult thinking, which has been trained to judge in a critical way and sometimes a harsh way, and go to the essence of my love for music. And it was very strong at that age. At that age, 14, I was like, I'd look at my heroes, Jimi Hendrix, B.B. King, these are gods, and that was a very big shift, which is, chill out, adult, who am I trying to satisfy? An imaginary musical society out there, or am I trying to satisfy my own love for music? So bizarrely, when I'm thinking about this today, this is actually an example of inner child work where it's not the adult that is doing the healing. It's actually connecting with a part that was rich with passion. So, inner child work, some of it is about healing a part that was struggling back then, but inner child work could also be some of the riches that exist in the history, I mean, I remember that there were times in my childhood that there was a kind of a simplicity and an innocence to seeing the world. That innocence that grew up ended up in a lot of complications, and some of it needs to, maybe over trusting, and you get in trouble then. Somebody, fucks with you, steals your shit, But there are areas which are gold, like my love for music, at that age. Now when I think about it, I think as a musician, who's been at it for at least 43 years or whatever, there were times in that development where maybe I got too analytical or too intellectual or too caught up in technique, and that can take away from music. If I ask my 14-year-old, the 14-year-old was impressed by speed, but was also very touched by somebody like B.B. King, for example, who doesn't aim to be a flashy technical player. B.B. King is just so full of soul, I think, I'm going to look at my notes just to check if there's anything there. So the purpose of this work is look back, find out, think about areas which from childhood that need healing or embracing or love. Try to attend to that. Check in whether I'm grounded before I do the work. And sometimes the memories come on their own spontaneously, so you deal with them, you reflect, you take your time. But also there are areas of gold, or magic that can heal me as an adult today. Yeah, I think that's, for now, that's my exploration of this area.